Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull. The combination, unstoppable. How did he do it? McLaren, 2 world champion drivers. The outcome, unexpected. One man could stay in contact with the leader. To the other, contact too often meant something else. Ferrari, 2-time world champ Fernando Alonso. The famous flame red cars, barely visible this year. A new track, a new way to pass. Moments of glory and some moments when things went wrong. 19 races. Find out who won and who lost and why on Formula One Debrief next.
Well, after 19 races in 18 countries and nobody knows how many cups of coffee, the 2011 Formula One season is now complete. Sebastian Vettel is champion once again in a very different way than he claimed his first title last year. We'll talk about the entire season in this edition of Formula One Debrief. I'm Bob Varsha with David Hobbs and Steve Matchett. David, pretty much a triumph all the way around for Sebastian Vettel.
Absolutely incredible. And actually, we do know how many cups of coffee, because according to the Pirelli statistics, they served up 23,500 cups of espresso over the season.
I meant how many we drank, not how many they served.
But it has been an extraordinary season, and there's been... Vettel, of course, has just absolutely overrun the whole thing with a massive records, some of which are going to take a long time to break. That 15 poles is going to take a long time to break, even though there were more races than when Mansell got his 14. But apart from Vettel, there's actually been some very, very good racing. You know, second, third, fourth in the championship were within just a few points of each other right to the end of the season. So if you took the Vettel equation out, there would have been a very, very good season of racing. There was some terrific racing, but Vettel, boy, oh boy, did he stamp his authority on, or what? I mean, finally Webber had his win, one win in the same car right at the end of the year.
Yeah, it was an incredible season, absolutely. And you talk about Vettel's championship, he seemed to run away with it, but it was really as a result as well of driving the newly designed RB7, which was an incredible piece of machinery. That, combined with the fact that we had 2 or 3 different engineering challenges, Pirelli into the sport this year, big challenge for the teams, brand new tyres as far as Formula One is concerned. Pirelli have been out of the sport for 20 years, so they were really on the back foot coming in here. And they did a pretty good job, actually, of making the racing exciting. Also making the racing exciting, the DRS introduced this year, the rear wing slot on the wing opening up there to increase straight line speed. That was very good. Was it contrived racing? For me, it was. Did it spice up the racing? Yes, it did. It looked great on TV. And the reintroduction of KERS, voluntary removal of KERS system last year, and reintroduced this year because of a subtle change in the technical regulations. So all in all, good engineering challenges and a terrific car won the Constructors' Championship with a great team behind it.
Well, that'll give you some idea of what we'll be talking about over the next hour. And if you don't think it was exciting, well, let's look back on a few of the moments as we saw them from the commentary booth.
Here come the lights. Turn up the volume. Who cares what hour of the day it is? Wake up the neighbors. The Formula One season is about to begin. Down Under.
He has done it. 4 in a row, back-to-back in Malaysia. There is no stopping Sebastian Vettel.
If Lewis Hamilton can pull this off for the race victory, it will be...
Oh, there he goes. There he goes.
What a pass! I tell you, if you want anybody to pass anybody, you better call up Lewis Hamilton.
1 lap to go.
Oh, he's close.
Oh, wow! Button is through. I can't believe it. Jenson Button has enough clear track to bring it home, leading just 1 lap, the lap that counts in Canada, and he wins for McLaren.
Look at this.
Wow!
Alonso inside for second place. Fernando Alonso. The crowd will love this.
Braking now. Throttle out. He's done it.
Now, Vettel into the pits. Alonso pits also.
Uh-oh. There goes Alonso.
Alonso
has taken the lead. Checkers out. Alonso takes the victory for Ferrari in the British Grand Prix. Has Massa gotten past Hamilton? Oh, they're still battling. Wow, go on. Take it to the line.
Now, if Ferrari can just keep the tyres good, up to temperature for the opening lap, it will be advantage Ferrari. McLaren know this.
Yeah, you've got Hamilton trying to come around.
Oh!
attention! Wow! What a pass! Lewis Hamilton, the British Bulldog at its best. Absolutely. Just never, ever, ever gives up.
Call him Mr. Opportunistic, but Jenson Button will come through in his 200th Formula One Grand Prix with his second victory at the Hungaroring.
The powerhouse that is McLaren have clawed back, and they're coming after Red Bull. Vettel having to move with the Ferrari.
Outside of the Curva Grande. Oh, into the grass, but he hangs on.
Good gracious.
Yet another notch in the belt of Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull, looking more and more like a championship duo again in 2011.
Sebastian, you're the 2011 World Champion. Well done.
Thank you so much, every single one. Every single one. We took nothing for granted, and we did it.
Round 17 of the 2011 season, the inaugural Grand Prix of India.
Whoa! Oh my goodness me, those two have done it again.
Can you believe it?
Oh my God.
There is always one indelible way to erase all the bad memories in your life, and that is to go out and win if you are a racing driver, and Lewis Hamilton is that and more. Finally, a victory in Abu Dhabi. The checker's out, and Webber will finish the season on a high note with his first victory of the year and his second at Interlagos.
You couldn't ask for more, could you?
Well, that was a little taste. Now, how about the champion? In 2010, the only time he led the points was after the final race of the season. In 2011, he led from start to finish. We'll talk more about Sebastian Vettel when we return.
What will stand out for you from this incredible season that you've had?
I'm allowed to name a couple. That's difficult.
Speed's coverage of Formula One Debrief is brought to you by Mazda. We believe if it's not worth driving, it's not worth building. And by FreeCreditScore.com. Get your score.
2011 was a season utterly dominated by a driver who just a short while ago was more a kid than a champion. He achieved it not through luck, not because the opposition was weak, not because he was backed by the massive resources of Ferrari or McLaren. He did it with a very small team, a modest budget, and pure talent. Sebastian Vettel is that rarest of all things, a complete natural.
Well, I think Sam Posey put it very well. A complete natural, Sebastian Vettel. Last year, we saw him collide with his teammate Mark Webber. He had a high-profile crash at Spa with Jenson Button, and we all thought, well, yeah, he's quick, but boy, this kid's got a lot to learn about race craftsmanship. But boy, this year, Steve, it seems he's just put it all together.
Yeah, he has, absolutely. As soon as the season had finished, Christian Horner, the team principal at Red Bull, said one of the biggest things we've seen change in Vettel is the maturity level raise throughout the season. That's one of the reasons why Webber has been on the back foot, because Vettel is just a different man than he was 12 months before. And really, you know, when you look through the annals of Formula One history, you try and piece together a perfect Formula One racing driver. You're not far off with what Sebastian Vettel is now. His ability to control the race from the front when there's nobody ahead of him, to look at timing and scoring and gauge how far he should push the car, is very reminiscent, as you always say, David, of Jimmy Clark. And if you look at his cold, calculating methodology of being able to run the race correctly, well, there's Alain Prost right there for you. He can drive in the rain. He's shown the maturity and the daring do of a Michael Schumacher. He is almost the perfect racing driver going into next year, 2012. Everybody else should be very afraid.
Very alarmed indeed. And of course, the other thing about him too is that he is such, or seems to be, such a nice guy as well. And if you can carry that off, which is why I don't think he'll ever drive for Ferrari, because I think the political infighting in Ferrari, or political tension there,
Try to control him too much.
would just be too much for him. It's just not his sort of scene now. And driving for, as Sam said, they're not exactly a small team, Red Bull, and they seem to have got a pretty big budget, but nevertheless, it's a very homey team, and someone like Christian Horner, who's such a nice guy as well. And obviously, it's just a perfect place for him.
Yeah. I had a chat with Kyle Petty once, who said one of the things King taught him was Be good to the press, because they are the people who are going to be talking about you day after day when you're not racing. And we heard from the press this year that championships have not changed Sebastian Vettel in that regard either. He will stay there in the press room until everybody's questions are answered. 7 major records tied or broken this year by Sebastian Vettel. Have a take a look at all of these. You can see he took some of them away from Michael Schumacher, or at least tied Schumacher, but there also could be the name Nigel Mansell up there next to the poles, and Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, and several great champions, among whom Sebastian Vettel will be counted in the years to come. Simply a dominating season, leading all the way. So what do we make of Sebastian Vettel? You know, the hardest act in Hollywood is to follow up a triumphant performance. What does Vettel do with Red Bull next year to top this?
Well, I think it's going to be more of the same. Again, we're only going to see his racecraft increase if Red Bull, Adrian Newey and the design team can carry on that success of the RB6 to the RB7 this year's car, improve that for next year's car for the RB8. The biggest change in the technical regulations is going to be one of aerodynamics, the relocation of the exhaust system. That's going to play right into Adrian Newey's strength. He's going to be an unstoppable force, I think, quite frankly.
It certainly does look a bit dire for everybody else. And of course, that pole, you know, we saw with that pole record this year, 15 poles. That, of course, doubled his poles, so now he's got 30 in just a relative handful of starts. And now he's lying just 3 poles behind the next 3 guys in line, who are all equal, which is Mansell, Prost and Jimmy Clark.
Right.
And then he'll jump into 3rd overall.
I guess we better get used to it. Well, Red Bull likes to do things as a team. They also clinched the Constructors' Championship for the 2nd straight year. They're going to need a good number 2 behind Vettel in 2012 if they're going to repeat. In fact, when we come back, we'll take a look at some of the other teams they'll be fighting.
What will stand out for you from this incredible season that you've had?
Am I allowed to name a couple? That's difficult, but Monaco, I think, will be definitely one, especially the way we won in Monaco, where we achieved something that nobody thought is possible. So that was very sweet. Monza, because I've won my first race there and we have struggled so much previous years. Singapore, because I think it's the toughest race all season for the drivers in terms of concentration and fitness level. So we had a couple good ones. Leave it there.
McLaren scored only 1 win in the first 6 races, a poor start for a team of this caliber, but one they gradually overcame with a relentless series of upgrades. Jenson Button rode this rising tide to unexpected heights, while Lewis Hamilton won big but lost big too. The 2 champions showed just how different 2 drivers can be, driving the same car.
Well, no one wants to be second place in Formula One, but given what McLaren went through from the beginning of the season to the end, they did a masterful job to finish second only to Red Bull, Renault, and Sebastian Vettel in the championship. Notice the difference in stats between Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button. Button's total of 270 points scored this year is 14 more than Sebastian Vettel scored in winning the World Championship last year. Gives you some idea of just how dominating Vettel was this year. But McLaren really did a great job, David, as you like to point out, from the car they had in testing to the car they had in the season finale in Brazil.
Yeah, their testing car was a disaster. It was parked at the side of the road most of the time because it kept on braking. It was a fairly outrageous design. They tried to bring in too much new stuff, and so they had a terrible winter session. Yet right from the drop of the right from the green light in Melbourne, Hamilton was on the front row, and of course he spent more time on the front row than anybody but Sebastian Vettel, which was a testament to his qualifying ability, but of course he just couldn't follow it through with races this year. Just had so much bad luck, bad judgment, and it obviously caught him out badly in the end. And meanwhile, Jenson Button went serenely on to become second in the championship. And then old Vettel was a little bit lucky there too, in as much as we had this incredible succession of different second-place finishes in those early races in particular, and he just kept inexorably stretching his lead out because nobody could make a real solid challenge for him. Always somebody else that came second. But the McLaren team, I mean, that drive of Buttons in Canada in those wet conditions was absolutely sublime, really.
Yeah, it was. And of course, you have to remember they're the only team that have 2 world champions driving the machinery, so they've certainly got very good depth of driving talent there. And talking of depth, of course, they have very good depth of engineering strength and the resources back at Woking. And that enabled them to turn the car that you were describing in pre-season testing that was very unreliable into a very reliable and ultimately incredibly quick race car. But really, I would think amongst the top 3 teams, Ferrari, Red Bull and McLaren are the guys that you would always give the nod to be able to do that.
And we'll be looking for big things from them coming next year. There were rumors in the offseason they might switch to Honda engines. That has been roundly denied by the team. They'll be Mercedes-powered next year. And then there was Ferrari, third in the championship this year. Just one victory to the proud Scuderia. That thanks to Fernando Alonso. The real mystery was Felipe Massa, who has another year on his Ferrari contract. But it has been made clear to the Brazilian that Bahia better produce results next year. Notice, no podium finishes. 7 times Massa finished in the top 6, but he never broke into the top 4. He just could not threaten the top 5 men in the championship.
No, and even their one win, actually, from Alonso, was a little bit on the fortuitous side because it was just about the one and only bad pit stop that Red Bull had all year, which took Vettel out of the lead. Otherwise, Vettel would have won another one. So Ferrari were a bit lucky to win that race as they did. I don't quite know. They just didn't like those hard tyres, did they?
No, it didn't like the hard tyres, and also, which was certainly a factor at Silverstone, if you remember, we had that short break in the technical regulation which allowed the use of blown diffusers, something, an aspect of technology that Scuderia Ferrari struggled to get to terms with, and that played into their hands, I think, enormously at Silverstone, enabling them, along with that unfortunate pit stop by Red Bull, to take that victory in what was, for Ferrari, a very significant race. It was 60-odd years since that first appearance, first race win for Ferrari. So it was a great result for the Scuderia to do that. But looking at Ferrari, of course, they had a lot of changes. They had staff changes. Aldo Costa was removed as technical director. Pat Fry was given that position as technical director in everything but name. So they had a year of rebuild, and they were caught off guard in a similar way, but slightly different to McLaren, with the wind tunnel data not working out in the real world as it did virtually.
How about a word about Fernando Alonso and the job he did this year? There's probably no more pressure-packed drive in all of motorsports than being the clear #1 at Ferrari. He always had to be a cheerleader. He had to try to keep team spirits up, got the fortuitous win at Silverstone, which certainly helped. But I think he did a pretty good job this year.
Well, he's one of those guys that could get a slightly dodgy car by the scruff of the throat and just get the most out of it. And he's been particularly good in the races as opposed to qualifying this year. And he's just driven his rear end off a couple of times. Very, very tough driver.
Well, they'll be looking forward to big improvement next year with a revamped technical lineup, as Steve explained. And speaking of technology, that'll be our subject when we return to the season-ending edition of Formula One Debrief.
There's been a few. Canada was pretty special. It's one of those races that if it happens just once in your career, you're pretty happy with that. Japan was a great race for me because, you know, I'm very close to Japan. My girlfriend's Japanese. I raced for a Japanese team for 6 years. And you know, got a lot of respect for the Japanese people. And Hungary, you know, it's my 200th race, the race where I won my first Grand Prix. So they're all very special.
I won't
Apparently you just told our colleagues in the press that you were asked by the team to hold position about 4 or 5 times towards the end of the race, but it looks like you didn't pay too much attention to that.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I've not been caught up, right? That's good. Yeah.
For some reason, I was mixed up with Fernando, so the people called me Alonso, but I guess I don't know. Maybe they had to wait for a long time and went to the bar in between. I don't know.
First practice, the times on mediums looked good. The times on softs look comparatively good as well.
No, it's a fluke. It's a fluke. We have been lucky. Tomorrow's everything is gonna turn bad again.
My engineer came on the radio. You got the fastest lap. Slow down. Keep maintaining the gap.
I take great pride knowing that I am the person, I am the reason why Seb cannot celebrate his World Championship here in Singapore.
Yeah, he said he will kill me, so I'm afraid I might not be with you in India.
I've got a flight to catch, but if I can, I would love to.
Cancel the flight. If you've never seen McCartney live, you got to go.
Well, you know, we're friends now, so I'm pretty sure I could get a live performance at some stage. So.
Who's that, being mates with Paul McCartney?
I'm messing with you.
Some of the more droll moments between the Formula One drivers and the press. Here's a look at the final championship driver standings for 2011. David, take it away.
Well, there you see that big gap between Sebastian Vettel and Jenson Button. And one of the reasons there was because I said earlier on, everybody else kept coming second. You never got the same guy coming second. And early in the season, Vitaly Petrov and Nick Heidfeld took points away from McLaren and Ferrari, which also didn't help them in their quest to try and stay up with Sebastian Vettel. And there you see Nick Heidfeld still in the 11th spot, and he hasn't been around since about July. A couple of good rookies, Paul Di Resta there in 13th spot for Force India, and of course Sergio Perez, a young Mexican, down there in 17th spot for Sauber. So that was a pretty good run. Poor Rubens Barrichello, look at that, 4 points. 19th season, not what he was hoping for at all.
Not exactly a level playing field in the points. Interesting to consider that other than the 2 Renault drivers, Heidfeld and Petrov, who took 1 podium apiece early in the season, every other podium position for the balance of the season was taken by one of 5 drivers, the top 5 of the points, and you know who they are. Let's talk about technology. Steve, you mentioned earlier the big engineering challenges this year were the return of KERS, the arrival of the DRS, moving rear wing, and of course, Pirelli tires on the scene for the first time.
Yeah. 3 big changes to the engineering of the cars and 3 big challenges, you're right. Formula One designers, engineers, mechanics, they all have a challenge, no question about that. That's the main reason for being in Formula One. But they don't like the unexpected, really, and they want complete control over what they're working with. With DRS, drag reduction system, bespoke systems made individually for the teams, by the teams, and the same with the KERS systems. More or less, every team coming up with their own design, they can control that. With the Pirelli tyres, no control over that whatsoever. They are supplied the tyres from Pirelli. These are the tyres you're going to have to make best use of. Now, in pre-season testing in Spain, there was a lot of high degradation wear figures coming off those tyres and a lot of dark mutterings from the engineers scratching their heads saying, we have no clue how we're going to get through the first race. It could be 5, 6 pit stops, who knows? The tyres seem to be falling apart. But once we got down to Melbourne and the first couple of races after that, the engineers got on top of tyre wear, Pirelli got on top of their degradation, changed the compounder constructions through the season, and lo and behold, no real complaints from the drivers or the engineers, and Pirelli were very happy, and all in all, a good job, I think.
Well, of course, Pirelli's part of their brief was to make a tyre that degraded because they wanted to see more pit stops, because this year, also another technical change was no fuel stops. So we're starting these races with 300-pound cars weighing 300 pounds more than it did on Saturday afternoon in qualifying. So degradation was part of the game, because if you remember places like Turkey, early on in the season here, I mean, the track was absolutely, I mean, it's practically knee-deep in stuff. And there was a stat came out from Pirelli, what they did, 10,000 kilograms of rubber has been
21,000 pounds of clag on the various racetracks.
So they did a fantastic job in the end. And of course, we saw the lap record broken on a number of occasions and qualifying records. So the tyres were certainly up to the job. There's no doubt about it. Plus, of course, the other thing where you've got to use 2 different compounds each weekend as well. So I thought Pirelli did an absolutely outstanding job coming back from a 20-year layoff and being given a very difficult set of circumstances to fill.
Right. And with KERS coming back after a brief trial in 2009 and the DRS, movable rear wing, being introduced, it gave the drivers more weapons. We said it on a number of times throughout the year. It didn't guarantee that you were going to pass the guy ahead, but at least it gave you a greater opportunity to give it a try. And this is another technology like the tires, Steve, that I think the teams will get their heads around from an engineering perspective as we go forward.
Yeah, the engineers and mechanics learn every single race, no question about that. The KER system was reintroduced voluntarily by the teams, more or less because of a change in the technical regulations which stipulated what the axle weights have to be. Rather a complex explanation, but you couldn't gain an advantage by moving the ballast around the car. Hence, the advantage was going to be run the KERs. DRS, was it contrived, opening the rear wing and you had to be within a second of the car ahead, etc., etc.? Kind of, yes, it was, but it did spice up the racing, and we saw overtaking. The TV viewers liked it.
That's right, and it's worth noting that not every team used KERs in 2011. I imagine they all will in 2012. We'll take a break, and when we return here on Formula One Debrief, we'll take a look further back down the pit lane. Stay with us.
I think the highlight has to be Silverstone qualifying, 6th position, and then Singapore race 6th position, Budapest, because I started at the back of the grid, 23rd after the penalty I had, and I finished 8th, so it was definitely a good race.
Highlight, I think as for obviously the special moment was arriving on the grid in Silverstone.
And we've had some interesting races in Spa and Monza on our side. Probably those ones to be mentioned.
The good point. No good points.
If you measure Michael Schumacher's comeback against the lofty standard of his pre-retirement days, it has been a disappointment. 2 seasons now without a single podium. But he has shown the world that competing in Formula One means more to him than protecting a reputation. Instead of the castle, it's the cockpit.
And here's proof of what Samposi is talking about. In his 2 years since returning from a 3-year retirement, the 7-time world champion once again outperformed by his teammate Nico Rosberg in the Mercedes cars this year.
Yes, it must be a bit disappointing for him. And of course, when he came back last year, we all thought, well, it's just a matter of time before, you know, old Michael gets his old verve back and starts wiping old Rosberg's clock. But not happened, has it? They're both very competitive. I don't think the car's very competitive. And of course, it's not a great stat to have when your teammate Rosberg keeps outscoring you so badly, especially when Nico Rosberg's already done 108 races and still hasn't won one. So you're not a great thing to be compared to.
No, it must be very difficult for Michael. He clearly wants to be in Formula One, and there's no question about that. That's the reason he's come back, as Sam was pointing out to us there. The car is certainly nowhere near the quality of machinery he had at Ferrari. Right. All of that being said, nevertheless, Rosberg is doing a stellar job to outpace Michael for all of these races. But I have to say, I've got great respect for Michael, having worked with him, known how he works. He wants to be there. He wants to be not just a part of Formula One, he wants to make the team stronger. He wants to work towards making the Mercedes a winning car. And if you listen to the engineers, particularly Ross Brawn, who knows him very, very well, Ross's comments are always, he's getting better race by race, we feel more confident, we're doing a better job supplying the drivers with machinery, expect better things to come. And I think we will see better things to come.
Well, I think the team there, they're one of these teams that's really suffering from the no testing ban, because when Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher were supreme in Ferrari in Formula One, they did nothing but test all the time. And of course, they can't do that now. And maybe Michael's finding that a bit of a handicap, more than he thought he would.
And we expect to see both of those drivers back next year. Michael has a year on his contract. Nico Rosberg has a brand new contract. Take another team down the pit lane, though, Renault. And there will be big changes there with the announcement, even as we come to air, that 2007 world champion Kimi Raikkonen will return to Formula One. I wonder if he'll have a better ride than Michael did as he came back. But it'll be Raikkonen and presumably Vitaly Petrov with Renault as it changes to become officially the one and only Team Lotus in the pit lane. Interesting year they had with those bizarre forward-facing exhausts, switching drivers in midseason, getting rid of Nick Heidfeld, and really sort of falling off the performance curve in the second half.
Well, unfortunately, they were one of those teams that in pre-season testing, that forward-facing exhaust seemed to work like a charm. And in fact, on one of the early test sessions, Robert Kubica headed the field, and the Renault were looking very good. Then, of course, while in the middle of the testing, Robert Kubica had that horrendous crash in a rally car and completely ruined his right arm and his leg, and still hasn't recovered yet. And I think the team missed him to carry on that testing and development work on the car. Although they did come out of the box pretty strong with 2 podiums in the first 2 races. So things were looking very good, but they fell off very quickly after that.
Yeah, they did fall off, and Renault have been very forthright in their comments about their R33 chassis and basically said, well, yeah, it was a disaster, unfortunately, but they came out of the box, as you say, with the front-facing exhaust system on the car. They'd committed to that technology, and in Formula One design, to change that and go back to a rear-facing exhaust would be an incredible amount of work. Fundamentally, you need a new chassis. Well, mid-season, that ain't going to happen because it just takes too much time. So they were caught off guard with that. They were caught off guard with management changes. We've seen people being promoted, people being demoted and out of the team. Driver changes, as you said. I think they've got a lot to play for next year, but the signing of Kimi Räikkönen has got to be a lift to that team.
It will certainly be from a performance standpoint and a pedigree standpoint, but Kimi not well known as a driver who can develop a race car. If it's not good at the beginning of the year, it's going to be difficult perhaps to make it better. And then there was Williams, the proudest team in the pit lane, 9 Constructors' Championship, perhaps the second most highly decorated constructor of all times, suffering their worst season easily in the long history of Williams Grand Prix engineering. And I suppose, as is always the case, there are a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah, and in fact, the final race at Brazil really encapsulated that. Last year, Nico Hülkenberg in the Williams was on the pole, and Rubens Barrichello qualified 7th. This year, Barrichello qualified 12th. Maldonado was down in like 17th, 18th spot, and he was maybe hoping to end his career with a bang, and it kind of went out with a whimper, if that was his last career race for Rubens Barrichello. But the team itself just seemed to have had a miserable year. I mean, why would that be, Steve? Is it?
Well, I think the car, as we've talked about before, unlike Red Bull, which is an evolution car one after the other, this year's Williams car was a revolution. Did away with the big volume diffuser, dropped the transmission down. We saw the drive shaft run at a very steep angle. That caught them off guard, I think, with the reliability. Cosworth engine, down on power, down on reliability. That caught them out. They had to take a 9th engine and pay the penalty for that. And also managerial changes again. New technical director Mike Coughlin brought into the team. That should start to improve next year. But you're right, this year is a year to forget for Williams.
A lot of folks will be pulling for Williams to make a comeback next year. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, talk about that great battle for 7th in the Constructors' Championship, worth tens of millions of dollars, after a thought from Vitaly Petrov.
Highlight of the season. Australia, of course, when I took my first podium.
Yeah. What was that like, the emotions going through you?
I cannot, to be honest, tell to anybody to tell what was really going on inside of me, because it was something. All the weekend was perfect from beginning to the end. We didn't do any mistake, was qualifying and race tactics, pit stop, everything was perfect. And when I take this podium, when I see my guys downstairs, and I was really happy because they was happy.
For teams in the middle of the pack, the share of the tens of millions of postseason prize money is determined by where they finished in the Constructors' Championship. To a team with a modest budget, this payout can be crucial. The money could mean more R&D, a bigger design staff, a higher profile, perhaps even the chance to leave the middle of the pack behind.
And here's how that battle for the Constructors' Championship money turned out for 2011.
Well, absolutely remarkable result for Red Bull Renault there at the front. 650 points on the board. McLaren Mercedes, they look out second, just shy of 500. Then we drop down a little bit to Scuderia Ferrari, 375. That is your top 3 right there. Then we drop down to double figures. Close battle between Sauber and Scuderia Toro Rosso. And then Williams Cosworth with but 5 points on the board, but even that is better than Lotus, HRT and Virgin, who between them have scored nothing at all.
It's very difficult for them, but a good season for Lotus to make that incremental step up, which, as Sam Posey points out, means a lot of money, and that can have a huge impact on a team.
Yeah, we saw some good battles all through the season. Force India came on very strong towards the end and nearly beat Renault team, not quite. But then further down, you got Sauber and Toro Rosso, both of whom started off the season going pretty well, really. But they both seemed to fade. But luckily for them, they kind of faded together. And right into the last race, it was a nip and tuck who was going to be 7th in the championship. And, of course, Sauber managed to get it by just a couple of points there in the end. And then, of course, there's the 3 teams who didn't score any points at all.
Yeah, they didn't score any points. But, boy, one of them certainly scored a lot of money, Bob, as you were just talking about there, Lotus finished 10th in the Constructors' Championship this year. That made them $10 million in TV money from FOM. However, because they finished 10th last year, and because of the nuances of the contract, of the agreement between the teams and FOM, that gives them another $30 million. So for finishing 10th in the Constructors, not 1 point on the board, that team has $40 million to its name. Virgin and HRT, not 1 cent of payout money from FOM.
Yeah, very difficult for those teams. And perhaps we talk about money too much, but I think the average fan perhaps doesn't understand how much money we're talking about. $658 million paid out to the teams last year. We don't know this year's numbers yet. So even for those teams down at the tail end who may not score points, there can be a huge amount of money involved, and as we say, that certainly helps them contribute to the battle to make their way forward. Virgin next year will officially become the Marussia team, and there's been a driver change already announced there, as well as Frenchman Charles Pic, a GP2 graduate and protege of former Formula One race winner Olivier Panis, will be back on the grid, replacing Jerome D'Ambrosio at what will be called the Marussia Cosworth team next year. We'll take another break and start wrapping up the 2011 season here on Formula One Debrief, so stay with us.
I think generally the season's been successful for our team, especially the last third of the season so far, and we've had really good races. We've been able to beat a few of the cars ahead of us on good performance. The Saubers, the Williams, Renault, sometimes, you know, it's been good.
Speed's coverage of Formula One Debrief is brought to you by Acura. Acura Advance.
Time to wrap up this final edition of Formula One Debrief for the 2011 season. Obviously, our colleague Will Buxton was not able to join us for this wrap-up edition, so we'll take this opportunity to bring you some of Will's finest moments in Formula One pit lanes around the world.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. You join me down here on the grid with Bernie Ecclestone. Bernie, fabulous to be here in Japan. Well, it's a little too early. Webber had the use of that curve system. Oh, and we're getting knocked over. As the rain... Front wing, new rear wing, veering. Assembled and raring to go, and I don't know what I'm saying, so I'll start again. The most important part, Red Bull Racing, and you're going to drive through my shot again, aren't you? If I could turn back time. What's that all about? I am not a performing monkey.
You're all right, you are. Yeah, I like you.
Well, there you have it. Proof that when you're working on your own in the far-flung corners of the Formula One universe, sometimes you just have to amuse yourself as best you can. Our thanks to Will Buxton for a great job in the pit lane throughout 2011. Final thoughts on the season, David?
Well, there were some terrific moments, too numerous to mention, except that halfway through the year there was a bit of a rumour going around that Sebastian Vettel couldn't overtake. He was great if he was in front, but he couldn't overtake. And then, of course, came Monza, and he goes around the outside of Alonso, around the Curva Grande at about 160 miles an hour with 2 left wheels well and truly into the gravel and grass. So I assume he can race. That lad is not only a nice boy, he's got very large attachments as well.
For me, I always like to see old colleagues do very well. Pat Fry being promoted to technical director at Ferrari is wonderful. And also Alan Permain at Renault, trackside director at Renault, terrific. And in a wider field, that shot of Sebastian Vettel on the podium at Monza, tears in his eyes as Alonso said, look at that. Look at the Tifosi out there in front of you. That, to me, was a defining moment. I believe Vettel is destined to go to Scuderia Ferrari.
Yeah, we may be seeing the beginning of a dynasty here for sure. Well, as for me, I think I'll look ahead to 2012 when, with the return of Kimi Räikkönen to Renault, everybody else stays where they are. We will have an unprecedented 6 world champions vying for a spot on the Formula One grid. There's a lot of news yet to come in the offseason. You'll find all of it at speed.com, and we'll look forward to joining you in March of 2012 with the first round of the 2012 Formula One Championship on Speed. For David Hobbs and Steve Matchett, I'm Bob Varsha. As always, we'll leave our final note on the season to our friend Sam Posey. So long, everyone.
Between November 7th, 2010 and October 30th, 2011, Red Bull's Sebastian Vettel competed in 19 races, of which he won 13. Over the course of those months, he went from being a young driver for whom much was hoped to a champion of whom much is expected. His performances connected the present with the past. His starts recalled Jim Clark half a century ago, the way Clark in just one lap, and seemingly by magic, could get 2 seconds on the field. His tactical savvy took us back to the 1980s and the mastery of the man they called the Professor, Alain Prost. While the records Nigel Mansell set, and which became targets for Vettel, take us back 20 years to the early 1990s. Looking at Vettel's stats, it's easy to conclude that the season belonged to him alone. In fact, many of the races were extremely close, and Vettel could be beaten outright. In China, for example, by McLaren's Lewis Hamilton, in this thrilling duel for the lead. By Jenson Button, who passed him on the last lap to win in Montreal. And the season gave us much else to remember. The historic first Grand Prix of India, the stunning pit stops, 4 wheels changed in just 3.5 seconds. Fernando Alonso's electric start at Monza, thrilling all of Italy. The startling performances of Jenson Button, driving better now than when he won the championship. Lewis Hamilton making far too many mistakes, but redeemed in the end by his genius. Does the car count for too much today? Only to those who look at racing as it used to be, not how it is. That steering wheel, full of toggles and LED readouts, is the key to a new dimension of driver performance, allowing him to tailor his car's handling corner to corner. Whereas a Rubens Barrichello may struggle with this, Vettel, along with rookies such as Sergio Perez and Paul di Resta, is fully at ease in this all-new electronic era. But whatever the era, there are things about racing that are the same today as they were in the time of Fangio and Moss. Mark Webber got it right when he was asked what is required of a driver. Commitment, he said, and joy, and a bit of an unknown ingredient. Trying to understand that unknown, the mystery of what makes Sebastian Vettel better than the next man, is what fascinates us all and makes this costly, dangerous sport of Formula One worth all the trouble.